Welcome back to the Liberating Generations podcast. I'm Dr. Keesha Ewers, and this is my daughter, Regan Claire. And in this episode, we're going to explore how trauma can show up as physical pain with Jane Hogan, AKA the wellness engineer and the founder of Breathing for Healing.
Jane blends proven leading edge science and ancient spirituality inspired practices to help people release chronic pain using the mind, body, and breath so they can become empowered creators of their own health.
Welcome to the show, Jane.
Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm just so thrilled to be speaking with two of you and on this important topic, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah,
Likewise.
it's always an adventure to see where it goes, isn't it?
It is.
We're talking about liberation from different kinds of pain in this show. So, a lot of times people will think about physical pain and they don't realize, like I did a lot of years in hospice. And what I discovered, one of the pearls of end of life care was the higher your emotional pain, the more pain medication it takes to really, solve the physical pain problem. And so I know you have your own story of personal intergenerational trauma. Would you be willing to start with that? We always like to lay the groundwork with how this all came to be, like what you're doing here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't think it was, a big deal, just carrying on my life. But I started off life very young, at a very young age. I think really I had lowercase t trauma, but really being hyper vigilant and really being, it's interesting. I read about this in Gabor Mate's book, When the Body Says No, about rheumatoid arthritis people and how they set up all these uh ways of just like, okay, I can look after myself. I don't need any help from anybody else. And it's a very common trait. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that was me.
I don't recognize that at all.
And you know what? When I look back, I used to call my mother like fiercely independent. Fiercely. Okay, so that's another word for not asking for help, right? So I think definitely it's come down, and I was had a very healthy until I hit 50, and then my mother died suddenly, and then a lot of stress associated with that, and I found myself a year later with severe joint pain, and within 3 months, barely able to walk, and later diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which I have now reversed, thankfully, done a lot of work and really learned a whole lot. And I think, looking back at our lives and the generations, we can see that there's been patterns, and I sort of feel like it's stopping here. But so both my parents grew up in England they were children during the Second World War, and there was a lot that happened in that time with them. I mean, my mother, having to carry gas masks going to school and bombs, dropping in their neighborhood and having to leave school whenever the air raid siren went off and having to go into these like Z-shaped buildings for their lessons then. So there was a lot with that. And then my father, he was actually evacuated. You probably heard about like children and evacuees during the war. So his mother and the three boys were all evacuated to the countryside, and so they lived with the farmer. And but they weren't necessarily welcome. Like, it sounds really nice, but they weren't really welcome. They kind of had to, like, be out of the way of the family. And so the country families were these people were just kind of assigned to them. So that wasn't the most pleasant experience. And I can see with my dad, there was a lot of he was very emotionally distant as a result of, he was the oldest and probably a lot was expected of him. So, looking back, I can see how all of these things play out. I mean, it's quite interesting. And maybe we all came here to experience this. But yeah, so that's kind of how I see this happening and coming forward into my generation.
So what did you notice as a result of these detached skillful responses from your parents' child selves. Like that was the perfect thing for them to do at the time. But then when you take that skillful adaptive response to trauma into adulthood, it can cause some trouble. And so in that parenting of you and your brother, how did that come across for you?
Yeah, so I'm the third of four siblings, and another really interesting thing that my parents. I was born the day before my father left for Ethiopia to work, and so my mother couldn't sort of follow along right away, and because I had to have my immunizations and all that, so it was about 2 months or something before she could take me and my older siblings to meet my father in Ethiopia, where we lived for 2 years, and my younger brother was born there. Um, so my older brother, so my father sort of dropped him off in England along the way with the grandparents, and then he went along. So here's my older brother, 4 years old, and all of a sudden, he's taken away from two of his parents and left with his grandparents, and who knows what trauma they had and they brought to the situation. And I do remember hearing that he had pneumonia. And then my mother shows up in England with me, who he probably hasn't even seen before, and my sister, and then we go on to Ethiopia. And so he's like, okay, who's this little thing? What's this little thing that my has brought along? I'm thinking, like, is this little boy? And
Yeah.
so he kind of poured all that out on me. And then my father was very emotionally distant. My mother used to say, your father's eccentric. And yeah, there was that. I mean, he just kind of wasn't really aware of what other people were thinking. So uh, I say all this with the deepest compassion for everyone involved. I don't hold any anger or there's just none of that anymore. I don't feel like I need to forgive anyone. I've done that. I did need to do that, but I don't need to do it now. But it's just interesting to see how all this plays out. So here's this little boy who has an emotionally distant father and was taken away from his parents, and then shows up in Ethiopia, and he has to go to school there because by then he was old enough to go to school, and so he kind of poured his frustration and anger out on me, because hurt people, right? So that's just kind of the way it is. So I started off life kind of being my earliest memory is being teased all the time and crying, and then being teased for being a crybaby. And then I stuttered too, apparently. And then I was teased for stuttering. So, I mean, it's no wonder I had trouble expressing myself in the world or feeling like I didn't have anything important to say. So it's a big jump now to be doing what I'm doing, hosting a podcast and doing all these other things. But for a lot of my life, I wasn't able to do that. I put on a pretty good facade, though. I really did. But inside, whoo, shaking.
Don't know anything about that.
I know. I'm like, I'm preaching to the choir over here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
those facades. Oof.
yeah. So then, rheumatoid arthritis, when it first showed up, I was like, oh, okay, this is a stress thing. I've just been through all the stress. But then as you peel back all the layers, and we were talking about the Enneagram just before we hit record, and these personality traits that we have, how they show up. They show up as, physical. When we ignore them long enough, some of them will show up as physical pain in the body or illness or dis-ease in the body. It's quite interesting, actually, when you start looking at it. It's fascinating, I find. And I see it, in people that I work with. I know you've seen it in people that you work with too, these personality types. And so that's super interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, so before we jumped on this call, we were talking a little bit about the Enneagram, and you said that you're a 1.
Yeah.
And typically the 1's body structure can be kind of rigid, which it's fascinating to me that you developed rheumatoid arthritis, which is, it's joint pain, it's rigidity, it's when it gets bad, it's hard to move. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, what was your personal experience of the process you went through through reversing your rheumatoid arthritis, through finding liberation through that your early life trauma.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, initially it wasn't any of that stuff. I was like, okay, anti-inflammatory food plan. That's perfect. I will do that. And I will chart and graph and make all these diagrams
Like a
and
good
keep
little
track of
one.
everything, data, I was
Follow
doing
it
all that.
perfectly. Yeah.
Yes, I will figure this out. And, that's the engineer, perfectionist, all of that stuff in me. And so I was doing all that. And actually, it worked it did help with some of the symptoms. And then, looking at other softer lifestyle things like, okay, I need to get more sleep. And let's really start to look at some of these relationships in my life. Maybe there's some I kind of need to push away for a little while just while I heal. And so that took me so far. And then I discovered I had SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, which is not a root cause. But at the time I thought, oh, that's the root cause. But there's a root cause behind the SIBO as well. Not being able to digest life, right? Um, so anyway, I, worked at all that and I thought, okay, I'll get that sorted out and then I'll be done. I'll take all these, supplements and then I'll be done. And then there's still something, okay, there's still something there. And then I started learning more about mind, body, and then like reading. One thing I did get from my parents was a voracious habit of reading. And so I read a whole lot and really discovered so much about the personalities. And also I had read Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life, like 30 years ago. And so I remembered this, all of these diseases. So I got the book again. I was like, rheumatoid arthritis. Oh, doesn't like, resentment and anger kind of were some of the personality traits. I'm like, wow, I didn't think I was like that. But I realized it's holding it in. I was really holding it in. And then I started looking back at the childhood stuff. And so doing a lot of forgiveness and releasing, different techniques for releasing. Tapping was probably one of the first things that when I started doing I found a tapping routine on YouTube and I just did it. And the tears were just flowing. And then I realized, okay, I got something to release here. And then, that worked for a while. And I tried some other things. I've done eye movement therapy, whole lot of different things. And this is never like done, I don't think, because we had these subconscious programs that we developed when we were little that are still those habits that we would tend to fall back to, probably in times of stress. If everything's going well, then we probably can manage like to be aware of them and not fall into those traps. But sometimes they still creep up and I go, oh, there's that old story of they don't like me going again. And that's not true, right? So that's another one that's really powerful too, was the work of Byron Katie, right? Is it true? Like her 4 questions, the very first one, is it true? Do you absolutely know it's true? So it just kind of catches you with those habitual thinking patterns that you fall back into. So these are all tools that I like to use with people I work with as well.
We're the RA sisters.
I love that.
We are.
No, I really love that. We talk a lot about how we have so many thoughts that come in. And, my mom likes to say, just because you have a thought doesn't make it true. It's like constantly questioning that conversation that's just constantly going in your mind. Like all of those thoughts actually, they're not true. And really having compassionate curiosity with that is so important.
Love
I think
that.
the
Love
thoughts
that.
are they're always true. They're always true. But who are they true for? Right. And so if I were to take, my vice principal who sexually abused me, so from my 10-year-old child state, and I say men who misuse authority are dangerous, right? Then my 10-year-old self would say that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, from my 58-year-old self, I can look around and I can say, oh, that can be true. And it can also not be true. And what is it that my 10-year-old needs to hear from me now,
Mm-hmm.
right? To be able to have more complex thinking, because
Yeah.
the 10-year-old brain wasn't developed enough for complex thought. There can't be
Right.
this is true and this is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where sometimes I think people get a little hung up is it is true. And they absolutely is, right?
Yeah.
For your little one who experienced it with the developmental state they were in and the brain development they were in. And then whatever adaptive behavior response that was created back then was super great, skillful, kept you alive, so good. And then when you get into adulthood, it becomes maladaptive. And
Right.
then there can be a broadening of the view and more complex thinking is possible now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that complexity can be taught by
Mm-hmm.
you to your child self. Like, I've got this now. You don't need to navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is true for you.
Right.
But right now I've got this and it's okay, and I think that's an important for all of you that are hearing us that say that had really big traumas, that say, no, what I'm thinking about this is true.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. And
Right.
how does it keep you chained?
Mm-hmm.
What nervous system response does it then trigger to have that perception of yourself and your world today?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's that doing to your gut and your hormones and your immune system? Right.
Yeah.
And let's get you liberated from that, and that's the beauty is that is possible. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know it's possible. I know it's possible. I think you were the one might have even suggested this to me. I have this picture of my little me here,
Yes.
and I often think that like I've got you. I've got you now. It's okay.
Oh,
Right?
show your picture of your little you.
Oh.
Oh,
My little, go get your little one.
okay.
Our little ones can play with each other today.
Oh.
This is a really, I think, important activity is to be able to visualize and see your little one who might be activated and not run over the top of her, right?
Yeah.
Or they, them, and
Oh, there we go.
there they all are.
Sweet. You two look a lot alike.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like you're right. I do. I have all of my students and patients, make sure that they have a picture of their little one where they can see them. And if that's the one running the show, it's important to quickly, securely attach to that one who's feeling triggered and give them the teaching that's required in that moment to be able to get out of that state of being. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think so often it can come out sideways too, where we can get stuck in that story of that traumatizing event that happened when we were young. And we look at children around us and we say, they don't deserve that. Children don't deserve to go through that. And so then there can be a lot of pent up anger that does arise, a lot of that quickly shifts into victimization though.
yeah.
It's very interesting. It's this like, I don't know, it's two sides of this really strange coin.
I didn't deserve this,
Yeah.
and the truth is those little child parts don't deserve that.
Right.
And that is what happens in life. Every single person goes through trauma. And some of it's lowercase t trauma. Sometimes it's big capital T trauma, but everybody goes through betrayal and heartbreak at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
And that is the pathway of being a human, to go from loss of innocence to the attainment of wisdom if you're willing to walk that path with conscious awareness. And so the willingness to release the I didn't deserve, story is you turn to the little one inside of you and say, you absolutely did not. And this did happen. And I've got you now, and I see you, and no one's ever going to hurt you again. And then you have to actually be good to your word to that little one. Like if you say, I'm not going to eat sugar anymore, or I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore, or I'm not going to get into toxic relationships anymore, then you better be good to your word, because your little one's watching and they'll be real upset if you lie to them.
Yeah.
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 And then you've also got your body talking to you, right? I mean,
Yes.
if it's manifested as pain or illness in your body, it's kind of like now your body's talking and there's just no way to ignore it. It's there. I mean, you can, I guess, try to cover it up and do that's another route to go. That wasn't the route I wanted to go. I kind of knew that it was stress that had triggered this, and if that dial had been turned up and made this happen, I should be able to turn it down and it go away again, was my logical thinking. I think another thing is really surrender. Like being able to surrender is something that's so hard for me, trying to control things all the time. So that's surrender and letting go of the rigidity, because I got the rigidity going on. Letting go of the rigidity, and perhaps there's something else happening here. Perhaps I could let go and soften. Perhaps I could let other people help me a little bit. Perhaps all of those things. That surrender just didn't happen very easily for me. So that was something I had to work at. That was harder for me than, I jumped into the AIP food plan, no problem, just do it, right? But the surrender, that was the hard part.
Well, and it's even goes beyond surrender. It's the willingness to relinquish control that you think you have, but you absolutely never did in the first place. And to let go of the idea, because when you have trauma in your background, the idea is, if I figure this out, if I can control the variables, then I'll get this outcome. And over and over and over and over and over and over again, life keeps showing us that does not work. It's not true. The only thing we can actually control is our thoughts. And so the radical acceptance of what's happened, what is, grieving. We were just talking about this on our hike this morning, grieving perhaps the life that you thought you should be living right now.
Yes.
Radically accepting the one that you are living and truly moving into it and embodying it. Oof.
Huge.
That's big.
It is. It is. And understanding a little bit, another area that I've looked into a little bit is the neuroscience of it all, right? And how our brain, when we keep perceiving this threat situation, even if we're not consciously perceiving it, then we keep creating those pain pathways and wiring those neural networks in our brain. And so they can't unwire if we keep focusing on the pain or the illness or whatever's creating the fear in our life. So we need to have those breaks. And it's where, beautiful practices like meditation and yoga come into, where we can really just have some breaks, just let it go. So I find that really interesting and fascinating as well.
This just brings to mind, we talk a lot about self-care practices, meditation, yoga, hiking, all of those being a few of ours. And this previous weekend, we had a trauma healing circle at our house, and my sister was there. And one of my sister's favorite things to say is, I just don't understand why it has to be so hard. I've done all of this work. I've done so much work. I have all of these tools, but God, being okay is freaking hard.
That's funny.
Think to that. I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. In order to be okay, or to be, we're obsessed with being happy in our society. In order to be, what word am I looking for?
Content.
Yeah. In order to live a content, fulfilled life, we do have to do these practices in order to be grounded, embodied in our systems, to have a nervous system that's not going haywire. They're really important. And so, I want to figure out a way of rewording the idea that
it's hard. Well, it comes to expectations, because if you have an expectation, like Jane was saying, well, when I do this, it'll be done.
Right.
That is a very American way of thinking. I'm goal oriented.
Yep.
If I do this and this and this, I'll get the brass ring. I'll get the goal, and
Yep.
I'll be able to check it off my little list. Especially if there's a 1 any type, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always a list that needs to get check marked.
Right.
And so my daughter, her sister, has a very strong one wing and wants to check mark real bad. And so I think that just rearranging the expectation that you do something and then you're done.
Mhm.
You know, the thing of it is you have to constantly put gas in your car for it to keep going. You have to take it into the mechanic to have it
Yeah.
looked at under the hood and the oil change. You have to rotate your tires. You have to fill the tires. You have to stay alert and aware to what the car is telling you through its little networks.
Right.
And if you ignore them, which I did in my early 20s to the very sad detriment of my poor little Volkswagen Rabbit who blew up on the side of the road because I ignored the oil light, not knowing what it was. And it literally blew up on the side of the road.
Oh, wow.
I know, ruined the entire engine, which if anyone's had to, replace an engine, that's a lot of money. And so that taught me something in my early 20s, like, oh, pay attention. And so I think we kind of have to learn the hard way sometimes about that, right? That awake awareness to what the body is trying to say and what it needs in terms of TLC and maintenance needs to be shifted as far as what the expectations are. If we work hard, go to the gym, eat healthy, then the expectation is that we're entitled to a financial fitness and physical fitness, and that is not true.
Yeah.
That's an unrealistic expectation. No one agreed to it, especially your body.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's being willing to say, however my body is showing up right now it's like, this is the wisdom it's giving me. There's something here for me. And I'm like, it should be doing it this way. It should be doing it this way. Why isn't it?
It's abusive.
It's abusive. It's tyrannical, of trying to contort the body for how our cultural imaging says it should be. So I think anytime there's a should in there, it shouldn't be so hard.
Right.
That warrants a little examination of an
You're-
expectation.
You reminded me of, I'm really big on keeping journals. I really have been doing that for years, and I found that really helpful. But I think there was one point I had that should, like, I ate healthy all my life and I exercised, like, this shouldn't have happened to me. It's not fair, like that kind of thing. But even as I started to get better, I remember reading this a little while ago. I said, I've been eating gluten-free for 3 months now. I should be better. Like, as if it was something I was just going to do for a little while and then get back to where I was.
Well, I'm there.
I'm there right now with, I have SIBO right now. We're on a SIBO cleanse and I'm breaking out right now, and we're 9 days into this cleanse. And I'm like, I'm eating so well. I always eat so well. Why do I still have acne?
Well, she was doing this on the mountain this morning.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know. If we could just be, you mentioned curiosity earlier. It's just like, be in the moment and be curious, right? Oh, this is interesting. Look, that's interesting.
Compassionate curiosity.
Love that.
That lives in the ground of being that the body has its own innate wisdom. It is not here to be dominated.
Yeah.
It is here to be turned toward with collaborative curiosity, with compassion to say, how can we be a team? What do I need to do to support you, body? Because you've been supporting me all these decades, largely without gratitude.
Yeah.
So how can I support you to continue going in the way that, it's amazing what this body does. I remember being on the stage at Paleo Effects in Austin, Texas, several years ago, and I was giving a talk about the link between childhood trauma and autoimmune disease. And all of a sudden, right in the middle of it, I have all these people out there, and I get this download. And I just stopped what I was saying, and I said, oh my gosh. And everyone's kind of like, look at me. And I said, I just got how entitled we are as a species on a different level, because we believe that our bodies should operate in a very specific way to a certain age, and then we're supposed to die in our sleep with no pain. That we actually have that expectation
We
deep.
deserve that.
Yeah. And so I thought, and I said, all of a sudden, a bunch of these expectations just became super clear to me that we all carry, like, we somehow believe that our children shouldn't die before us. Where'd that come from? Like, nobody says that that's supposed to be the way it is, except for our aversion to death and our attachment to things we think are going to make us happy. Why do we think our body can't have a voice and respond back to us?
Yeah.
When it's living like a frog in boiling water in the middle of a toxic planet that we've created. Like, why do we think the body can't give us feedback, or shouldn't? And it
We
was
just
so
haven't been taught.
huh?
We haven't been taught, right? We
No.
haven't been taught to think that way. We haven't been
No.
taught to like pay attention to our body and what it's saying. I mean, even things like, tightness in your solar plexus, like what does that mean? Or when you get a pain in your neck, like what does that mean? And it's funny the language we use too, like, oh, what a pain in the neck. Well, I
Right.
think pain in the neck means something, right?
I
But we
know.
haven't been taught to tune into any of that. We haven't been taught to appreciate our body and all that. So maybe this new generation, like we talk about the generations, right? And it's stopping here. So look at the conversation you're having with your daughter now, right? And hearing all these conversations. So maybe this is where it's going to stop slowly, through.
I don't know. I'm guilty of the thing that actually creates part of the problem. I gave this one VHS tapes of all the fairy tales with the princesses riding off with the handsome prince at the end of the tale into happily ever after, where there was no pain, no emotional upset, no discord. I mean, I was raised
I
on
took
that
that.
stuff, loved it. And
Yeah.
I passed it on, and this is where we don't get into those conversations, I think, is because we have that deeply inside of us that there's a happily ever after somewhere.
And we want it.
We want it real bad.
We saw the Little Mermaid live action last night, and I was feeling into my little girl who grew up loving all these princess movies and the unrealistic expectations that came from that about how men are supposed to be.
Yeah.
Which, as you know, very unrealistic.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there watching this film, and I allowed myself for that 2 hours to just be in the fantasy, to be in the fairy tale and be like, oh, wow, what a lovely life this is. How wonderful it would be if this was real. And then afterward, I was thinking, I didn't talk to you about this, but I was like, man, I wish that there was a Little Mermaid 2 where they really get into Eric and Ariel going through shit. Like really, like the honeymoon phase is over. They're really digging into their past traumas and their shadows are coming out and the realities that actually come with existing.
Yeah. They start talking about up-leveling their skill set for some more skillful conversation. They take a nonviolent communication class together.
They're tapping.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, exactly. And it never goes beyond that. Yeah.
I will say Disney, and as far as I can see, they're coming out with more and more films that are better.
Yeah.
Right. Inside Out, I think, was Pixar, but Inside Out is a perfect example of one that it makes you think. It's excellent. There are less and less prince and princess movies coming out of the princess being the damsel in distress getting saved by a prince. So
yeah, I think you're right. But some part of us like still loves that. Like you said, you just wanted to have a couple of hours of that. Wouldn't it be just be nice to be taken care of and everything turn out beautifully? And part of us does want this
commercial that people still quote, Calgon, take me away. I mean, that was brilliant marketing, because it taps something where in the middle of all the chaos of the day, here's this, oh, just take me away from it, Yeah. So
I think, there is absolutely a small part that wants that feeling of just being able to collapse into someone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to remember, like, that's where the practice is.
That's where the practices
That's
are.
where the practices are. Exactly.
So what are some of the practices that you engage in, Jane?
Yeah, I love the mornings, and I feel like, what you get done in the morning affects your whole day. And so I really try to do things in the morning. So I do start waking up first thing, wake up with gratitude, and then do meditation. My husband and I do this together. We do meditation together and we do yoga together. And well, I'm working on a book now. So then my next thing is I come down and write in my book. I kind of had to put journaling aside because that was my journaling time. But, I want to write a book. So I have to carve out a time in my day, and it has to happen in the morning or it won't happen. So I'm working on my book every morning. And then we go out for a run. And, I've only just started running. My daughter is an ultra marathon runner. Like crazy distances. Her and her partner are running like 100 kilometers, 100 miles. She's done 200 miles. I mean, it is crazy, but she talks about being in nature and how wonderful it is being on the trail. And so she's really encouraged us to start trail running. So we've started trail running 3 mornings a week. And I really love that because we're outdoors. It's some time that more time that we're spending together. And I just love that feeling of like working hard and then being tired afterwards. And I'm so grateful. Like when I think back to where I was in 2016, when I could barely even walk around the block, I used to have to like walk around holding onto the furniture so I wouldn't put too much weight on my feet, to now be training for I'm not doing marathons. I'm only doing like, the one that's coming up is 8K, and then I got a 10K coming up. But that's pretty amazing.
Don't say
Yeah.
only. I mean, why would you do that? That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm sort of documenting and sometimes sharing it on social media because I feel like I want to inspire other people, just because a lot of people don't even know that there's any other alternative besides what they're hearing, to take the medications that
Yeah.
have pretty severe side effects. So I just like to be a spokesperson so people can hear it and see it. So documenting that's fun for me as well. So that's really good. I try to have some, what would you call it? Like mindset. So I try to like being very intentional about how do I want to feel today? How do I want to show up today? And lots of times I'll pick a card. We have, some different card sets. I'll pick a card and sort of to get some focus and alignment for the day. And I keep trying to come back to it. It's a challenge, right? Because I still like to do stuff and I still make my list and like to check it off. But I try to remember I have to come back to that feeling of, and I don't have to do it all. And I have like a whole universe of energy, behind me. I don't have to be the only one doing it. I can ask for help. So try to remember that and throughout the day. So I try to do that when I'm like getting up away from my desk and going down to the kitchen. Seem to do that a lot. So try to do it on the way there. And yeah, so those are the kinds of practices that I like to do every day. The morning is key, though, I find. What do you think?
That's
yeah.
us too. We're very much same. We
Yes.
get up very, very early in the morning.
Mhm.
We do a journaling practice and then head out the door.
Mhm.
And it depends on the time of year. When it's long days with a lot of daylight at this time of year, we get out first to get on the mountain so that our dogs can be off leash and not run into other people with their dogs. In the winter time, we do our meditation and our other spiritual practices first and then go out because we're waiting for some of the light to come. So yeah, we rotate it depending on the season. And food is a big practice, making sure that we're feeding ourselves intentionally. And we also do a lot of cards and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It's
And
fun.
it helps direct and guide, right? What I like to, there's like on the energetically, your left side is the feminine and it's the receptive side, and on the right side it's the masculine and it's the action side. And so I like to have practices that will balance those two, so that I'm sitting still and asking, how am I meant to be an instrument in the hands of the divine, and then getting up off my cushion and taking those actions, taking those steps. So I call it
Beautiful.
spiritual activism or sacred activism.
Ah, I love that. I didn't have a name for it, but there we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
One of the things, talking about balancing left and right out, I know you like do yoga as well, and the alternate nostril breathing is great for that. But one lady that I worked with this eye movement therapy, you have it here. I do have it right here. This patch, an eye patch. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
So you wear a patch over the dominant eye, which for me is my right eye. And it's really interesting when I wear this and I just let my eyes sort of go soft. All I see is the inside of this because my right eye is working so hard, right? So it just kind of proves that I'm very, very right down. I kind of knew that anyway, but that can help balance it out as well. So sometimes I'll wear a patch for a little while.
You can tell
Interesting.
with nostrils the same information,
Yeah.
because depending on if you're more right dominant or left dominant, then you'll have a different nostril. It's supposed to change every 90 minutes, the dominance of your nostrils. And if that's not happening, it's because you're pushing too hard on that other side. So,
So you're more action or more
Mhm.
receptive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right now,
interesting.
my right nostril is way more clear, so I'm in action mode, which makes sense.
Well, when you're talking,
Yeah.
teaching, doing anything like that, you want that right side to be,
Yeah. That's
more
fascinating.
dominant. Yeah. So
Yeah, there's not like a good or a bad, right?
Yeah.
It's
No.
just like
it's
finding some
balance.
balance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think
Yeah.
you'll do something with cold dip too, don't you?
Yes, I've been doing that. So I live across the street from a river, and I haven't been doing as much lately. So here's the thing. I kind of was doing it once in a while in 2021. 2022, I made a commitment to dip in the cold river once a week, 52 weeks of the year. And I did that because part of my personality, if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I'm committed. Horrible, horrible days out, that horrible cold easterly wind blowing down the river, and I still got in. So this year, my husband decided he was going to start trying to do it as well. So we were kind of going about once a week, and then we just got out of the habit. And I haven't made the same commitment publicly. So I went on Mother's Day. That was the last time I went. But yeah, I do cold showers though.
Mm-hmm.
But I find the river, like that, just that immersion, getting in the cold water is, I don't know. It's just it's awful at the time,
Yeah.
but it feels really good afterwards. But it's also like I can do hard things. Like I'm in control of my mind. Everything else is saying, "Don't do it. Why are you doing it? This is crazy." But like I'm in charge. I say we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this, and it helps lower inflammation. It does all kinds of good things for your well being, health, like just your mood, and it also you get really warm, right? Because the brown fat that's along the spine gets activated, and there's a lot of mitochondria in there, so you have more energy and you feel warmer throughout the day. It's really good. Like when you get into a regular practice of it, I really enjoy it. You gonna try it?
I've been talking
She
about
has.
wanting to try it out. Yeah.
You
How long do you shower for in the cold water?
So here's an interesting thing. There's a lady in Finland, I believe. I can't remember her name, but she's been studying the effects of cold. Well, she was doing cold water swimming, but just immersion in cold water. And she says all those great benefits of cold water immersion, they don't get better or yeah, they don't get better after 30 seconds. So in other words, 30 seconds is all you need.
All it takes.
Oh,
That's
really?
all you got to do.
Okay. I tried it the other day for probably about 2 seconds and I said, "Nope, we're gonna turn this to warm."
Yeah, it's so hard.
I can't
Actually,
do hard things.
I find the cold water immersion in the river easier than the cold shower.
Really?
I
Crazy.
get out drippy, drippy, drippy. I sauna every day. And so
Yeah.
I'll get out of the sauna and I'll do a cold burst in my shower. So I'll have to make sure I'm doing it for 30
30
seconds
seconds.
now.
That's not too long. I read
No.
something like 5 minutes and I was like, I'm not.
Yeah.
Uh-uh.
Yeah.
Well, when I heard that, I was like, that is perfect. It's just like 3 slow breaths, right?
Yeah.
right? Easy.
Definitely. Okay, well,
Yeah.
try that.
Focus on the breath.
Like-
That's all I do. Okay. Focus on the breath. Right. So you're just calming yourself down, and it's just like 3 breaths. And sometimes, like, because I tend to breathe a little bit faster, I'll go, okay, when I think I want to get out, I'll just do one more breath.
Nice.
Yeah. Great.
I love it. All right.
Well, Jane, is there anything that you feel is missing from our conversation that you would like to talk about before we close?
I I don't think it's missing, but just maybe to highlight again that, we're talking about these intergenerational things that have been like we got through no fault of our own, but to not feel not blame,
Yeah.
not blame anyone, because blaming keeps us in that, victim kind of position. And so to think, okay, maybe I chose to have these experiences. We don't know what the big karma is and what, if or even if there is, but believing that, I think, helps remove that blame. It's just like, maybe I even chose to have these experiences for my own development. So I just feel like that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's true for me very much so. There have been too many
Yeah.
things in my life that have happened that seem to come out of left field or nowhere. And I
Yeah.
just think that must be a karma fruition right there. And so I brought it in to learn from it. So let's learn from it.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of feeling like, why me? Or I don't think I can do this. Like, okay, I don't think I can do this. I need to get a new set of skills. Let's go find it,
Right. And really anything that triggers us, whether it's a physical pain or illness, or whether it's like, you feel hurt or left out or angry, all of those aren't about anyone else. They're just about us, right? For our own
Exactly
growth and development. So try to see it in that light, and to find, okay, with that compassionate curiosity again of what am I meant to learn from this?
Yes.
I did a study back in 2013 called the Healing Unresolved Trauma Study, or HURT study. And one of the things that I found in that study was, once you move into an adult brain at age 26, where you have that complete prefrontal cortex developed, executive adult function, that you get an opportunity through a series of events throughout your adult life to go and do just what we said, where we get to investigate whatever our child self said about life and reframe it, restore ourselves, repair. But the word that is essential for that kind of self-confrontation, self-inquiry, compassionate curiosity is the word willingness. And if the word willingness is not there, it won't happen. And so it's being willing to go there is the very first thing. And then the second is to be willing to integrate, which means practice again and again and again, and not think of it as hard, but essential.
Yeah.
Right. And so the willingness to integrate whatever your breakthroughs and downloads are. So one of the things I see going awry with plant medicine these days is a lot of people are on spiritual experimentation, and they're getting a lot of downloads and breakthroughs on things, but then they don't have somebody to help them with the integration process. And so it just goes out like a sieve, it's like it doesn't stabilize the system or the mind, or allow for a shift in perceptions that is, that creates a new framework and found grounding. So that
so
integration and willingness, both really important words.
Love those.
Well, thank you so much. And we will put your contact information and in the show notes. And we just really appreciate the work you're up to in the world, Jane.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate you, both of you. This has been really fun. You're such fun interviewers together.
Thank you.
It's a lot of fun to do this.
It is very fun.
Yeah.
We love each other a lot.
All right. Until next time, everyone, be well.